Tonight, a dangerous blizzard slams into Newfoundland and Labrador. Heavy snow, extraordinarily strong winds, power outages shut down the capital.
This is outside our shed.
How Newfoundlanders braved a historic storm. Also tonight, compensation for the families of Flight 752.
These families need help now.
Ottawa steps in to help relatives devastated by loss. Ojibwe takes center stage. The 10-year-olds making history in Winnipeg. This is The National. Right now, we're tracking an incredibly powerful blizzard moving across parts of Newfoundland. States of emergency have been declared in St. John's and surrounding communities. Officials are warning everyone off the roads and indoors because it is so dangerous, and it's not letting up anytime soon. This has been the scene in eastern and central Newfoundland through the day. Wind gusts strong enough to blow you over. Snow falling fast, at times 10 centimeters an hour. By the time it's all done, and that won't be until tomorrow, 75 centimeters or more is expected to have come down. Then the digging out begins. We have extensive coverage tonight throughout the program as we watch to see how this monster storm plays out. The thing everyone there seems to be saying today, they've never seen anything like it. And as Chris O'Neill-Yates shows us, even though most people were told to stay home, some were ordered to get out now.
Even for a place that's well used to tough winters, this storm is hitting hard. By midday, high winds, blowing snow, and zero visibility made streets impassable.
I can't see anything. I can't see across the street. Both of my cars are completely snowed in at this point. There's nothing out there except wind and snow, and it's kind of scary.
This was the scene at a home in the Battery region of St. John's tonight, an avalanche. The city is evacuating the area over fears of more. The snow started overnight. By morning, Shelley Bowen was still able to take her dogs out.
Boy, if this is the start of it, I don't know how we're going to navigate in a few hours. Pretty brutal.
Brutal is the word. Not long after, St. John's declared a state of emergency, the first time since 1984. The city even took plows off the road, except to provide emergency escorts. Hospitals are open, but the largest one told staff not to come in tonight, and no one in to leave. This cab company pulled its entire fleet off the roads for the first time in its history. That's exactly what people are being advised to do: stay home and off the roads. Social media was flooded with pictures like this, but officials warn letting snow pile up could be dangerous. It's so bad, Ottawa has offered help.
The Prime Minister, I know, has reached out today, so as the local MPs and the local minister here. So everybody's engaged in this, want to work with their communities.
This is nowhere near over yet, and just a sign of how bad this is, I'm just standing steps outside the door. We can't get any farther than this. So we're sleeping here tonight. And when this is all over, another huge challenge for people in this part of the province: digging out. Chris O'Neill-Yates, CBC News, St. John's.
Our Kayla Hounsel was also out in St. John's all day reporting on the storm, in the middle of the storm, until this happened. You can hear how strong the winds are, blowing snow, making it impossible to speak or really do much of anything outside. Kayla took that video in front of her hotel before she had to head inside for her own safety. And that's where she is right now. And Kayla, describe for us what it was like as the storm was reaching that point where you were taking the video.
Yeah, Ian, when that state of emergency went into effect, we had actually been reporting from just outside these doors here, and even that became just too much. It really was just too difficult to speak. That wind, which is still raging outside, rattling the windows here in the hotel tonight, was just so intense. It was taking my breath away and just whipping that snow right into my face. And then on top of that, the snow was coming down so fast and so heavy, it was actually filling my eyelashes, if you can imagine, and forcing my eyes shut.
So you're from Newfoundland, you've withstood some pretty big storms. What stands out about this one to you?
Well, I actually grew up in central Newfoundland, which typically gets quite a bit more snow than here on the Avalon Peninsula. I've also been a reporter in Nova Scotia for more than a decade, and I have never seen anything that even remotely compares to this, Ian. It's that combination of high wind and heavy snow. And you know, Newfoundlanders don't shy away from storms very easily. I always say if they say it's a bad storm, it's a bad storm, and it's clear they're taking this one pretty seriously, Ian.
No kidding. Thank you very much, Kayla.
You bet.
Now, before the storm intensified, some Newfoundlanders did brave the conditions to see for themselves just how bad it was out there, and they shared their stories with us.
This is outside our shed. We have a lot of snow, so that light, that's our back door to get in our house, but not really accessible at this moment.
As Newfoundlanders, we're definitely very used to having our fair shares of storms, but nothing quite like this where the snow is falling at such high rates. It kind of has a similar feeling to when Hurricane Igor hit us back in 2010 with the strong winds and rain that came with that. However, the roads were open then, whereas right now the roads are closed. It's really not a good scene right now here in the Avalon.
Can't even see our neighbor's house, our cars, or anything, even the trees.
Anything like this before.
Our windows are just covered with snow, some of them topped over with the snow.
So far today, we've had to shovel our doors out 4 times to make sure that we don't get fully snowed in. I can't see anything. I can't see across the street. Both of my cars are completely snowed in at this point. There's nothing out there except wind and snow, and it's kind of scary.
We all came in the shed as we have a fire in, so if the power does go, we can stay in here and stay nice and warm and cook our food on the stove. This is probably the worst I've seen here, but we're making the best of it.
Now, part of the challenge of cleaning up all that snow, and that's still to come, is how much was on the ground before the blizzard even began. The city of St. John says more than 170 centimeters of snow had already fallen this winter. 42 centimeters were still hanging around. That means there could be nearly 120 centimeters or 4 feet of snow on the ground by the time this blizzard finally lets up. Well, let's bring in Ashley Brauweiler, our meteorologist with CBC Newfoundland and Labrador. A wild day, and this storm is going to continue for hours yet.
It absolutely is. We're in the thick of things right now, Ian. We're looking at winds in excess of 160 kilometers per hour. Overnight tonight and heading into the first half of tomorrow, those gusts are still going to be strong, anywhere from 100 to, again, 160 kilometers per hour. Certainly not out of the question. And, you know, we're looking at a lot of snow as well, upwards of 75. Not out of the question to see any more than that. 80, 90 centimeters is certainly possible, but of course with these winds, it'll be almost impossible to verify those numbers. 75 centimeters of snow, that's about 2.5 feet. That is extraordinary by any Canadian standard. Add the wind, and it's really hard for a lot of us to relate to that. By Newfoundland standards, how rare is this? Yeah, and Newfoundland, Labrador is some of the wildest weather that Canada has to offer, that's for sure. The last time that we saw something like this, the snowfall amounts was in 1999. That was in April. Keep in mind, there was no snow on the ground at that point. There was about 40 centimeters on the ground when this storm initially hit. So, you know, I'm seeing reports on Twitter and on social media that this is a storm that Newfoundlanders will never forget. All right, well, the rest of Canada thinking about Newfoundland tonight for sure. Ashley Brauweiler, our meteorologist there. Thank you. Thank you. With the worsening road conditions, getting help to those who need it has been a challenge. Plows responded to more than 40 calls to help ambulance and police. Premier Dwight Ball has been tracking those efforts at a dispatch center in Deer Lake in western Newfoundland, where they've received an unprecedented number of calls, and he spoke with me a little earlier this evening. Premier, thanks for joining us on what obviously has been a very busy time.
Well, I'm pleased to be here under what is, you're right, a very difficult day.
So give me a sense of what kind of emergency resources have been deployed over the last few hours and will be deployed in the province.
Well, it's been a very busy day for our public sector workers in the province, and it started very early this morning with, of course, our crews through Transportation and Works. You know, they did their very best today to keep our highways open. as long as those folks that work with us in municipal affairs. But you know what happened here, of course, today, given where we were and a number of state of emergencies that were declared by our cities, and we really had to take our equipment off the road very early today to protect our workers who were working tirelessly to keep roads open, but it just could no longer happen in these extreme weather conditions.
Any difficult moments in terms of not being able to get to people who either needed help or felt that they needed help?
Well, I'm in the 511 call center. It's here in Deer Lake in Newfoundland and Labrador. But the conditions here today are the unprecedented number and volume of calls that are coming in, giving examples of many people in our province that were in distress. And with the plows off the road, with the equipment off the road, we had to keep the staff working in those departments, working at those depots, so that they could be deployed to support quite a few emergencies that were occurring across our province today. So it's been very difficult for our first responders, but we've been doing our very best to support them.
Listen, just a few seconds here, Premier, but let me ask you this. Unprecedented storm means unprecedented cleanup. When do you start turning your attention to that?
We'll be starting real early tomorrow. We're deploying all the necessary resources that's required that we have in the province. It will be difficult. We're asking people to be patient for a few days, but we're also asking people to check on their neighbors tonight.
You are calm in the center of the storm, Premier. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Ian.
We have much more on the blizzard to come, but first, still in Newfoundland. This house fire in Conception-based South claimed 3 lives last night just before the storm started. Officials say the house was fully engulfed by the time the firefighters arrived, only to find the hydrant encased in ice and snow. Friends and families of the victims stood and watched in clear emotional distress. And Alberta is investigating why an Indigenous teen froze to death while under government care. 1 week ago, the 16-year-old boy was reported missing from a government-approved First Nations agency in Rocky Mountain House, midway between Calgary and Edmonton. Hours later, he was found dead on a night when the temperature dipped to -29. The minister in charge said today, "I am committed to ensuring that the policies in place to support vulnerable youth are followed. If changes are needed, we will make them." Prime Minister Justin Trudeau revealed today that in addition to 57 Canadian citizens, 29 permanent residents of Canada were killed when Iran shot down Flight 752. And to the families of each of them, he announced immediate payments of $25,000. As Ashley Burke shows us, for families, this money comes at a critical time.
Through inconceivable loss, Masood Pourjam needs to keep driving his taxi.
I feel, one part of my body is gone and I'm missing it.
He's missing his brother Mansour, an Ottawa dentist with a contagious smile and the family's main provider.
Because now is a kind of fear factor that what is going to be next.
Mansour left behind a 13-year-old son as well as an 18-year-old Iranian nephew who he cared for in Ottawa. With his bank account frozen, the bills are piling up.
Soon I think probably even, I'm not sure if the utility can go on.
He's trying his best to care for them by staying on the road taking taxi fares, but it's hard to get through a shift.
I have to go home and I try not to be alone by myself. And it is embarrassing when customer is in the car and I start crying.
Today, it was hearing Justin Trudeau that brought him to tears.
Sorry, I can't go.
He remains weighed down by grief. But $25,000 from the federal government will lessen his burden.
It is not the compensation that we expect will come and should come from Iran in due course, but these families need help now. And we will be getting this money to them as quickly as we possibly can in the coming days.
For the Pourjam family, it's a lifeline.
At least that for a few weeks I can breathe a sigh of relief. That would be very helpful.
There's another immediate concern, bringing his brother's remains back to Canada. Today, Trudeau said he's encouraged that Iran is respecting families' wishes for repatriation.
I hope one day I can overcome this tragedy.
For now, he has no choice but to keep driving, keep moving forward. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
The Prime Minister also addressed earlier comments he made, interpreted by some as putting blame on the Trump administration for the downing of Flight 752.
What is your level of culpability you think the Americans bear in this?
The Iranians bear full responsibility for having shot down a civilian airline with 57 Canadians aboard, 176 passengers.
Earlier this week, Trudeau said without the increased tensions in the region, the passengers would still be alive. Today, he said Canada is focused on reducing those tensions on all sides. Iran admitted to shooting Flight 752 out of the sky only after days of misleading statements. Renee Filipponi details how the current tone of contrition and cooperation from Tehran, welcomed by Ottawa, is aimed at another audience.
It was his first Friday prayer sermon in 8 years, signaling a time of crisis. To an overflowing crowd, the Ayatollah Khamenei called for unity and defiance against the West. He called the downing of the plane a bitter incident that hurt our hearts. That apparent grief closely connected to Iran's retaliation for the U.S. assassination of General Qasem Soleimani. The Supreme Leader says that morning the armed forces were just trying to defend Iran. Support here, but there have been protests, anger about being lied to for days about who was responsible. Add to that a country struggling under crippling economic sanctions, and it's put pressure on Iran's leadership to create its own narrative of the crash, say Iran experts.
I think they're trying to somehow channel that anger in a different direction, away from the government and towards the United States, essentially.
There are signs the Iranians are trying to cooperate. Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif flew to Oman to meet with his Canadian counterpart.
How are you?
An exceptional event for two countries with no diplomatic relationship. The pair discussed consular support for victims' families and also the need for proper analysis of the black box data. After, Zarif tweeted, "Politicization of this tragedy must be rejected."
Those foreign governments have to be careful not to allow this incident to become some kind of confrontation between Iran and the West, because that will allow the Islamic Republic to recede behind a wall of national pride and defense.
Tonight, though, a new provocation. Responding to the Ayatollah's fiery denunciation of the United States as an arrogant power, the American President Donald Trump warned Khamenei he should be careful with his words. Renee Filipponi, CBC News, London.
Stephen Rigby wanted to die. The Saskatoon man fantasized about provoking police into killing him. Now, more than a year later, his mother is speaking out. Bonnie Allen has her wrenching tale of a mental health system that she says failed her son hours before police confronted him and pulled the trigger.
He loved his family very much.
Carrie Rigby Wilcox saw her son Stephen Rigby moments before he died.
And he did have a gun in his hand to his head, and he was crying that he's done. "I'm done, Mom. I'm done. I can't take this anymore."
She called 911, hoping to save the life of her suicidal son.
And I said, "Please don't hurt him. He's a good boy. He won't hurt anybody."
Police say Rigby fired his gun, and so did they.
Officers perceived a threat and engaged.
This is all the stuff that I'm allowed to have.
His mother has obtained medical records that show how Rigby had repeatedly sought help for alcoholism, anxiety, and depression. He had attempted suicide more than once. Then, just days before Rigby died, police took him to a Saskatoon emergency room where a psychiatrist then committed Rigby against his will to a mental health facility, noting he had suicidal intent, including provoking police to shoot him. The next day, a different psychiatrist discharged Rigby.
They said, "We have people that have no family, that actually are worse off than you, that need this bed. Are you willing to give your bed up?" And Stephen told me, "Mom, what was I supposed to say?"
48 hours later, he was dead.
That's not a decision patients should ever be asked to make, but I also very sympathetic with the healthcare staff that's put in this situation where there's people lined up at the door.
For years, there have been concerns about this mental health facility being overwhelmed. The opposition leader is calling for more treatment options for addictions and mental illness. The health ministry says it will add more beds and meet with Stephen Rigby's family.
What policies were missed? What gaps are there?
His mother has a lot of questions and wants a coroner's inquest. Bonnie Allen, CBC News, Regina.
More news ahead on The National. A Fifth Estate investigation prompts the review of a life-changing conviction.
I am not a baby killer.
Mark Kelly is next. Plus, the Winnipeg students who made NHL history tonight. And special coverage from Newfoundland and Labrador. We'll hear from more people in the thick of that unprecedented blizzard. We're back in 2 minutes. Another look at our top story tonight, the massive blizzard slamming Newfoundland. A state of emergency is in effect. Heavy snow and high winds have shut down some communities. So bad, some people at work are being told, don't even try to go home tonight. We'll have updates throughout the hour. An investigation by Fifth Estate has prompted the BC government to look into the 2010 conviction of a woman to ensure there was no miscarriage of justice. The woman was babysitting a child who drowned in a bathtub. The babysitter, Tammy Bouvette, was charged with second-degree murder. But as Mark Kelly reports, her defense was never shown evidence that could have exonerated her.
It was May 2011. Little Ayanna Teeple was getting a bath when her babysitter left to clean up a spill in another room. Tragedy struck quickly.
There was a 911 call to a residence here in town, in Cranbrook. The call was for possible drowning of a 19-month-old girl.
The child was airlifted to a Calgary hospital where she died. No charges were laid until an autopsy from Dr. Evan Matchis. He detected extensive bruising on the baby, which he said was typical of abused children.
Tammy Bouvette is charged with second-degree murder in the death of a 19-month-old baby girl.
Being charged with second-degree murder is not right. I love that little girl like my own.
Bouvette, the babysitter, pled guilty to criminal negligence and spent 2 years in jail. What she didn't know was in 2012, the autopsy in her case was reviewed by a panel of experts appointed by Alberta Justice. The 3 pathologists saw no sign of abuse on the child. That report was never shared with her lawyer, Jesse Gelber.
So manner of death, not reasonable. Cause of death, not reasonable. Other opinions, not reasonable. Yeah, well, that was my gut feeling when I got the file.
She wasn't a murderer.
No, she's just a really sweet person, actually.
Alberta Justice reviewed 14 cases handled by Dr. Matches, but when he challenged the review in court, it was struck down. Alberta Justice then promised a second review. It never happened. Meanwhile, Tammy Bouvette's life went into a free fall. She lost custody of her 4 children. We found her living on the streets outside of Vancouver.
A terrible thing happened, and I wish I could have changed it. And I got put in a category which I'm not.
What category is that?
I am not a baby killer.
Alberta Justice told the Fifth Estate it shared the expert review of Tammy's case with BC's Crown Service. But like her lawyer, Tammy says this is the first she's heard of it.
Shame on them for not, doing their job right.
After we contacted the BC government to ask why Tammy Bouvette and her lawyer were not given this information, BC's Attorney General appointed the special prosecutor. She'll investigate the conduct of the province's Crown Prosecution Service to determine whether this was indeed a miscarriage of justice. Mark Kelly, CBC News, Toronto.
And you can see more of that investigation this week on the Fifth Estate, Sunday night on CBC Television and CBC Gem, 9 o'clock, 9:30 in Newfoundland. To some other stories now making news across Canada tonight. A Saskatoon man has been found guilty of creating a phony fundraising page for victims of the Humboldt Broncos crash. Andre Olesiuk raised about $3,800 through a Pray for Humboldt GoFundMe page just days after that fatal crash in 2018. Bank records show he deposited most of the money into his own account. He'll be back in court in March for sentencing.
Little space, please. Yeah. Little space.
Meng Wanzhou made a brief appearance in BC Supreme Court this morning, just days before her extradition hearing is set to begin in Vancouver. The Huawei chief financial officer faces charges of committing fraud to try and evade U.S. sanctions on Iran. She's been living under house arrest since being detained just over a year ago. Civil rights groups opposed to Quebec's secularism law are taking the fight to Canada's top court. They've asked the Supreme Court for permission to have Bill 21 suspended, saying some Quebec residents have suffered serious and irreparable harm because of the law. The controversial legislation bans certain public servants from wearing religious symbols to work. The bill's constitutionality has already been challenged in Quebec courts twice. Both efforts have failed. And Thérèse Dion, mother of Canadian sensation Celine Dion, has died. The 92-year-old, affectionately known as Maman Dion in Quebec, passed last night surrounded by family. She was not only mother to Celine, the youngest of her 14 children, but also a television personality with her own cooking show. In a tweet earlier today, Celine says that she'll dedicate tonight's show in Miami to her mother. Time for a quick break. Still ahead tonight. Prince Harry and Meghan are coming to Canada, but what are they leaving behind? We look at the intense scrutiny they face back home. But first, back to Newfoundland and Labrador, a blizzard shutting down the capital. More on the emergency unfolding tonight, right after the break.
So when you're trying to sort of thinking after work you're going to walk home, this is the kind of thing that you're facing. Incredibly deep snow.
CBC Newfoundland and Labrador host Anthony Germain showing us just how deep the snow is in St. John's. That snowfall is expected to ease overnight, but winds of up to 100 kilometers an hour are still in the forecast. And Mayor Danny Breen joins us now via Skype from his home in St. John's. And Mayor, the weather's so bad that you actually haven't made it out of your house.
No, I haven't. I started this morning and started working with our staff and discussing what was happening during the day, and I've been here all day just working through the different issues that have arisen.
As part of the state of emergency, the city, the police as well have been asking people to stay inside, and from what I understand, people have heeded that call.
We've had good compliance, and what we did is we asked people just to stay in your homes. That's the safest place for you to be, and we all look out for each other here. And so we also asked residents to make sure that if they knew somebody who may need some assistance that they know of, to be able to contact them and see if they're doing all right too. So if we look out for each other, we'll all get through this. Any surprises at all for you today, Mayor? I'm surprised really with the wind strength. The forecast was pretty accurate, but 130, 140 kilometer an hour winds with 70 centimeters of snow is very significant. The visibility was so bad, in fact, that in my house, I live on a regular subdivision lot, there was a plow went up the street earlier today, and I could hear the plow, but I couldn't see it out onto the street. So the visibility was really bad. The conditions were very, very bad all day. Look, I know people in St. John's are used to bad storms, but we keep hearing that this one is unprecedented. So when you consider those winds, when you think about the amount of snow, more than 2.5 feet probably by the end of it, when you think about the possibility of a storm surge, are you worried at all of what the damage is going to be when the cleanup starts? I'm very concerned. My biggest concern is that when you have high winds, you have power outages. And when you have power outages, people are put in a very difficult situation. So my biggest concern here is that everybody is safe, everybody is taken care of, and that when we get through this storm, cleaning it up will be a major task. But as long as everybody's safe, then we can handle cleaning up. Well, a long night ahead in your city and in other parts of the province. Mayor Breen, thank you very much. Thank you, Ian. All right, our next guest has a unique perspective on how hard this storm has hit St. John's. Gary Horwood is a plow operator in the city, but as we can see, Gary, you're in your house, you're not outside. What's it been like out there?
Absolutely horrendous and brutal out there. And the reason I'm not outside is I'm not allowed outside.
And now you tried to just start with plowing your driveway. Tell us how that went.
Well, I went out at 11 o'clock this morning because I figured if I don't get a head start on it, I probably wouldn't be able to get out of my driveway. So I went out about 11:30 this morning and cleaned the driveway out and just pushed it all on the other side of the road. And at 3 o'clock, there was just as much in again. And I figure I'm going to have to go out in another hour just to try and keep ahead of it, because if not, I may not be able to get out of my driveway in the morning.
I think you told me that you've been driving a plow, or at least had a plow on your truck, for some 50 years now. Have you ever seen a snowstorm like this one?
No, we had a lot of snow in 2001. We had 692 centimeters in 2001, but we've never had a storm like this. I've never seen one like this before.
And then you got the wind to contend with as well. So, I've been talking about 2.5 feet as the amount of snow that St. John's might get, but with the drifts just in your driveway alone, it was more than that.
Oh, well, I mean, I shoveled out my patio deck there at noontime, and I had to shovel my way across the front of the house, up into the garden and out behind the house to shovel out the patio. And I walked in out the patio door, and right now there's 5 feet of snow up against the patio door. So, Gary, you're inside now. When do you think you're going to try venturing out again? Well, I'd say within the next hour I'll go out again. And I figure I'm going to have to go out halfway through the night, maybe at 3 o'clock, try and clean her out again. I just can't keep ahead of it. It takes about 3 hours and the driveway is full because the winds are absolutely horrendous. And what the winds are doing, it's just packing in the snow really, really tight and making it very, very, very heavy and very hard. It's compacting the snow.
Well, when it keeps the plow operators inside, that's an indication of how bad things are. Gary Horwood, thank you very much for speaking with us.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
So he's inside, but you saw our reporters out in the thick of it earlier. And let me introduce you to a couple of others.
Hi, I'm Pam Byrne with CBC News.
That's one way to pass a storm day. This brother broadcasting duo ahead in the moment. But first, what drove Prince Harry and Meghan to decide to move to Canada?
When you look at, Princess Pushy, or Wedding of the Rears, or Touchy-Peely Meghan, like how much responsibility does a newspaper like The Sun bear?
What's wrong with any of those headlines?
We look at that next on The National.
But we are people don't understand.
Welcome back. We want to show you a time-lapse view of the blizzard blasting Newfoundland. Philip Cairns captured it from his vantage point in Flat Rock, north of St. John's. Heavy snow, high winds, and frigid wind chills have parts of the province shut down. A state of emergency is in effect in some areas, and the storm is forecast to continue into tomorrow. Now to the storm of controversy whipped up by a royal couple. Reports out of Britain say that some of Harry and Meghan's household staff have been reassigned to Windsor Castle from Frogmore Cottage, their quiet home outside London that was a gift from the Queen. This comes just days after the Queen gave her reluctant blessing to the couple's plan to move part-time to Canada. Yesterday, Markle was spotted driving to the airport in Victoria to pick up close friend Heather Dorak, a fitness entrepreneur that she met in LA. With their move to Canada apparently taking shape, we asked Thomas Dagla to take a closer look at what drove the Duke and Duchess to rebel against their royal status and seek a life away from the crowds.
Well, hang on. I listened to you, Andrew, all morning. Protect the monarchy. So if it is
Can leaving Britain really mean escaping all the chatter?
public declaration before telling
All the noise that comes with a royal title?
The Queen has been put in an impossible position.
It's an unprecedented plan.
Absolutely bamboozled and worried.
But were Prince Harry and Meghan always headed this way? Always destined for a so-called Megxit? If anyone served as proof this would be no ordinary royal marriage, it was them. South London's Kingdom Choir, singing American Soul in a 15th century English chapel. An unlikely choice for a wedding attended by the Queen, but an indication the newlyweds would do things differently. Perhaps too differently for some.
When they got married, I actually thought, this is a real power couple. They want to change the world.
It's already a whole new world for the choir, spending more time touring. Ever since Karen Gibson's group became overnight sensations, thanks to one royal couple.
They've got a special part in my heart, and what it seems that they've been through is quite traumatic.
Rushing through plans to quit as senior royals, Harry and Meghan skipped consulting with the Queen, laying bare more evidence of a rift behind palace walls.
It's over a week on from the start of this crisis.
Providing plenty of fodder for those who make a living reporting on the royals, like Chris Shipp with ITV News.
For the past couple of years, I've kind of predicted that there was a crash coming. Now, I never could tell whether that was going to be a collision between Harry and the press, or Harry and the rest of his family. And I think what we ended up with something a bit of both.
Rumors lately have only intensified claims of a rift between Harry and William, the younger prince always appearing less eager to live life as a royal.
Great papers, great magazines.
Though in the media here, most blame Meghan. Portrayed as ripping Harry away, many have turned against her.
I think the press has to look at themselves and question, did we do everything fairly? And I think there is also another question that has to be asked. Was there any criticism that was based on race?
That is one bitterly divisive debate. How does racism taint the British media's coverage of the Duchess of Sussex? A biracial American who has said she identifies as a woman of color.
Straight out of Compton is a crazy brother named Ice Cube.
One of the UK's top tabloid sites might have you believe Meghan's story sounds like gangster rap, claiming she's almost straight out of Compton. There was this headline about her family's apparent past as cotton slaves, not to mention a BBC host comparing the couple's baby to a monkey. The racism issue hits a nerve here anytime it's brought up.
That racism plays a part in this.
You see racism in everything.
Like you. No, I don't.
What examples do you have?
You see, that is another problem. It makes me question, where have you been the last 2 years?
What made the press target Meghan? We took the question deep inside Rupert Murdoch's media giant News UK, home to the country's most read and highly aggressive tabloid, The Sun.
They have disliked the media attention, but I think it's wrong to actually pinpoint it on that, if any.
Executive editor Dan Wooten broke the story last week that precipitated the couple's big announcement. The Sun popularizing the term Megxit. More than 3 years ago, they also snapped the first picture of the couple out together. But when does a front page cross the line?
So when you look at, Princess Pushy, or Wedding of the Rears, or touchy-peely Meghan, like how much responsibility does a newspaper like The Sun bear?
What's wrong with any of those headlines?
Well, they're a bit sensational. I mean, it's
But we are the Sun. I mean, people don't understand what the Sun newspaper is. We are a newspaper, best-selling newspaper in Britain that has for 50 years poked fun at celebrities, at royals, at politicians. We don't bow down to authority.
Sure, some will say the Sussexes deserve all the criticism they receive. Campaigning against climate change, then flying off on a private jet, reaping the rewards of royal life, but never accepting the drawbacks. Remember, Harry never enjoyed the media attention.
Scarred by his mother's death, some of his best years were spent far away as Captain Wales in the British Army. Dean Stott remembers those days well.
Yeah, he's most comfortable away from the cameras, and that's when you'll get to know the real Harry, when there's no camera.
A former Special Forces soldier, Stott now does charity work and stays in touch with his royal friend to this day. He's got a hunch Harry and Meghan's new life might be just what they need.
You know, I've worked with the Royal Foundation on my last campaign, and there's a lot of protocol, there's a lot of red tape. If you take that away, they're actually in a great position to do a lot of good.
That choir foreshadowed change, but it may have come quicker than expected. For that couple in search of better harmony, it's another new beginning. Thomas Dagg, CBC News, London.
Coming up in the history of the NHL, this has never happened before. Tonight in Winnipeg, a choir of children took to the ice to sing the anthem in Ojibwe. That's next.
In Canada's high Arctic, the hull must get through. High Arctic Haulers, Sunday at 8 on CBC and CBC Gem.
Once more to our top story, the storm hammering Newfoundland with heavy snow and winds over 120 kilometers an hour at times. And with a state of emergency in effect in St. John's, people are being warned not to go outside. Conditions expected to remain treacherous into tomorrow. Well, hockey fans watching the Winnipeg Jets game tonight saw and heard something that's never been done before in an NHL event. As Cameron McIntosh tells us, it doesn't get much more Canadian than this.
16,000 people here? You're going to be seen across the country? Right?
No pressure there, especially if you're only 10.
1, 2, 3.
For this small choir from Winnipeg's Riverbend Community School, it's not just the size of the audience that's special.
Oh, Canada, oh, my Kina.
It's the song, O Canada, in Ojibwe. According to the Winnipeg Jets, a first for a National Hockey League game and a first in North American pro sports.
I'm really excited.
Why?
Because I really wanted to be a part of Ojibwe.
What's your favorite part about singing?
That I get to sing for other people.
A big platform for a language undergoing a revival, especially in Manitoba.
For far too long, too many generations, we haven't had the opportunity to share the gifts and the beauty of our Indigenous culture.
Nice! Kevin Chief is a community liaison working with the Jets to build ties with the Indigenous community, from getting kids playing to supports for education and mental health programming.
You can't talk about the history of Canada or Manitoba without talking about the unique relationship with Indigenous people.
Tonight's game, a fully Indigenous-led display of culture, right down to the warm-up jersey.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome from Swan Lake First Nation.
And for the girls, the weight of a Winnipeg tradition.
It's come from both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. Will the fans know when to yell True North?
Only one way to find out. Sung in their own voice, in their own words. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
We'll be right back. The Moment is up next.
And as you can see here, we have a raging blizzard.
You could say it was all hands on deck today in Newfoundland. We'll be right back.
You described the town as the last place you'd ever want to end up.
No, I described the town as the last place I'd ever want to end up.
Just follow my lead. Have fun with it.
Gotcha. We're never getting out of here.
Wow, that's bleak.
Ski Cross, live tomorrow at 5 Eastern on CBC.
There was no school, no going outside even, so what are a couple of kids supposed to do? Storm stuck in a raging blizzard. Spread the word, apparently. Newfoundland is still in the thick of it, but rest assured, journalists Peyton and Nolan Byrne are here to help. Inspired by watching a forecast last night, they decided to do their own today, and that is our moment.
Hi, I'm Peyton Byrne with CBC News, and there's going to be 38 centimeters of snow. And well, I was trying to tell everybody how much snow there was today. I'll show you the two storms on my paper, okay? Just 1 minute, let me show you it. We got really excited, so we thought we would actually do our own weather report, so we did it. Hi, I'm Nolan Byrne. We were having a PJ day, so that's why we're still in our pajamas. I think we're gonna get snowed in. CBC News Live.
So their mother says the two of them were reading books and playing board games to pass the time. One of them wants to be a journalist. He is basically living my life from the 1970s, right down to the glasses. Well, there's one exception. One of them had a sword, and apparently they sword fight a lot. My sister's 8 years younger than me, so not a lot of sword fighting when I was a kid. But anyway, they are precocious, they're cute, and one day, mark your calendar, one of them will probably be sitting right here. But for now, that is the National for January 17th. Good night.